don't know how you chose to download this episode today from me. Again, from the annals of resilience again. And I guess a couple questions could come up very quickly when you see the title as The Death of Derek Van Johnson. Because many of you who know me as Ming, it's like, who the hell is Derek Van Johnson? But then those who know me as Derek Van Johnson, and you're saying, the death of, I know that guy, what? He's dead? But bear with me for a few more moments, a few more 500 seconds in this episode. I can round this out for you. And as I'm still talking to you, I'm still alive, of course, in this moment. Never know what happens next, but keep that in context and at least, keep it a little light as far as don't get too upset if it's true that the death of Derek Van Johnson is, quite, morbid and morose and depressing. It's not. But in memoriam, I want to use that title, The Death of Derek Van Johnson, in memoriam of that name that was mine, but also offer you some more simplicity in this thing about resilience. And also, not just from me, but from many other people out there who are more educated and trained and experienced about non-duality. May have talked about non-duality, trying to make sure you have focus on one face, one presence, not your work face, not your play face, not your family face, not your boy's face. One person, one presence, which is all we ever have, each of us, about non-duality. So I mentioned that as a title for this episode, that I wanted to touch on this non-duality of me, or at least a lot less duality going forward. I could probably consider this, if you would review other episodes. There's one in the past listing of 820 episodes called The Day of Your Dead, DOYD. Consider this one, Day of Your Dead Part 2. And again, in other episodes and in this one, I am guaranteeing to change your perspective in this present moment on and of death. Again, actually, and in a finality, that could happen to any of us at any time. But yes, even from the context of the past and the present. But sorry, no soup for tomorrows in terms of context for death. I'm going to talk about tomorrow. But allow me to remind you of the distinct and tenuous and fragile value of this life in this moment. Thankfully, you and I, in this conversation right now and in this exchange of energy, we have the honor to enjoy and experience this moment. However, with or without each other, we separately or collectively can appreciate this moment. I suggest that we adopt and integrate that perspective into every moment we get the opportunity to live and to love and to commit to. Not during the good gravy times on the sunny side of the street, not just there, but under any and every condition and circumstance that appears on your path today, including the good, the bad, and the indifferent sides of that street or trail that you're on. So, the king is dead. Derek Van Johnson has passed. I know that title may have alarmed you when you came across it and decided to tune in. But hold on. You might be thinking, wait, this guy is dead? But I'm listening to his voice in this episode. I probably owe you some more further context in order to make the point in this conversation. But for a spoiler alert, yes, the moniker and the name Derek Van Johnson is dead. But the same guy, meaning me, the same guy, I can't speak of the sane or sanity part, but the same guy is still alive and kicking. But as me, Ming Q Ahmad. Now, let me continue. I had said earlier that I offer you my guarantee to change your perspective on this present moment of death that could happen to each of us at any time. Yes, but even from the context of the past and this present moment. Sorry, Dirk Van Johnson died about 24 years ago when I decided to change my name and become a father of my one and only son, and I could not accept passing on my given name since birth that served me very well through high school and West Point, Army, and my earlier corporate career. But then, with an evolving awareness and knowledge of my history and culture, and then with the advent of my son's birth, I could not justify passing on the remnants of my slave name suffix any longer. So the self-discovery of my heritage, and from both sides biologically of me, my mom and my dad's side of the family, and the limited perspective I had on myself to that date 24 years ago, I decided to retire or bury that name and to celebrate the birth of me and my son. It sounded simple. Yes, it did back then. And you probably can imagine the amount of negative pushback and feedback that I got. And there was no really welcome reception on this personal decision. I'd say more of a rejection from family side to personal side to business side. But especially from my family named Johnson. There was no disrespect intended by me, but that is part and parcel and essential to walking your own path, accepting and embracing the chances, the choices, and the consequences of your direct actions and decisions. Again, not quite as simple as it sounds in the decision, but the ripple effects and those perspectives of others can trouble the waters, as they say. Remember also, however, in the 820 Resilience Enterprise, self first does not mean selfish. So, to bring this story to a close, I alluded to this earlier about the name and entity of Dirk Van Johnson and his necessary departure from this moment called now going forward. In the 4 or 5 lives that I have lived, that's for another episode. I can probably cite 4 or 5 lives or phases that could be categorized as separate lives, but we'll get into that later. There are probably 3 or 4 groups of people who know me only as Dirk Van Johnson. Some know me only as Ming Q Ahmad. A few who know both names but one person, and then another group somewhere outside of that spectrum. For example, Group 1. That was my name, Dirk Van Johnson, from birth to high school to West Point to Army, left the Army, and then first 10 years in my corporate life. That was Dirk Van Johnson. Group 2. People who met me over the next 20 years as Ming Q Ahmad. Group 3. People I encountered over the next 10 years as a federal civilian, also as Ming Q Ahmad. But from the decision to bury Dirk Van Johnson and to allow Ming Q Ahmad to grow, the issues appeared when people from and within those 3 groups met each other. And that's why I said there could be a 4th group of people on that spectrum, those 3 groups, but not quite in any particular category. So, we are gathered here today, as they say in church, we are gathered here today to formally celebrate the death of Dirk Van Johnson and to celebrate the non-duality of Ming Q Ahmad. I'm just a guy with a message and purpose that does reflect the old dead moniker and does serve to focus and refine the resilience of Ming Q Ahmad. Thank you for coming to the party. We'll see about the now after party next time. Until then, and thank you for allowing me to give you that rundown of the death of Dirk Van Johnson and the birth of Ming Q Ahmad. But stay present, stay current. Until next time, please remember, it's always 820.